Okay, so when you picture Sparta, you're probably thinking of the classic hoplite warrior, right? That unstoppable shield wall, the undisputed masters of land warfare. And look, you're not wrong. But the real story, the story of how they won their biggest war, it's not a story about land at all. It's about how they, somehow, mastered the sea. So yeah, let's get right into it, because this is the big question, isn't it? How on earth did Sparta, a state that pretty much hated the ocean, end up building a navy strong enough to take down the massive Athenian sea empire? Well, the answer is a wild ride of, honestly, some brutal failures, a totally game-changing alliance, and just one, brilliant commander. All right, so at the very start of the Peloponnesian War, Sparta had this, well, it was a simple but absolutely massive problem. Their army, totally unbeatable on land, no question. But Athens, they completely, utterly owned the sea. And the craziest part is the Spartans knew it. This put them in what looked like a completely impossible spot. And what's just incredible about this quote is who's saying it. This isn't some Athenian general trash-talking them. Nope. This is their own king, King Archidamus, talking to his own people. It's him, just laying it all out there, admitting their two giant weaknesses. They didn't have the ships, and they sure as heck didn't have the sailors to man them. And really, this was the fundamental mismatch of the entire war. Think of it like a heavyweight boxer versus a master swordsman. On land, Sparta was the undisputed champ. But at sea, Athens was the superpower, with this incredible empire built on its fleet of triremes. And since Sparta couldn't just march in and score a quick knockout on land, they were forced to play Athens' game. They had to fight at sea. So, how do you think that went? Yeah, about as well as you'd expect. Their first attempts to go toe-to-toe with Athens on the water didn't just go badly. They were complete, humiliating disasters. You can just look at the early years of the war and see this pattern of failure, over and over again. And two battles really stand out, Naupactus and Pylos. They just painfully exposed how completely out of their depth the Spartans and their allies were. I love this detail from the historian Thucydides because it's just so telling. This wasn't about being bad at fighting. It was about not even knowing the basics of sailing. I mean, their fleet discipline just fell apart, and their ships literally ran aground because they didn't know the area. These are the kinds of rookie mistakes an experienced Athenian crew would never, ever make. 60. Just let that number sink in. 60. That is how many ships the Spartans just gave up to the Athenians at Pylos. They surrendered their entire fleet just to get a temporary truce so they could rescue their soldiers who were trapped on an island. It tells you everything, right? Their priority was always soldiers over shits, and it was just a stunning, absolute low point for their navy. So, okay, how in the world do you climb back from a failure that big to actually win the whole war? Well, the first piece of the puzzle had nothing to do with Spartan discipline or their famous courage. It was money, a whole lot of money, and specifically Persian money. And folks, this was the absolute game changer. You've got the Persian Empire, right? Sparta's old, bitter enemy. They look over and see a perfect chance to stick it to Athens. So the Persian prince, Cyrus, he doesn't just cut them a check. No, he gives the Spartan commander, Lysander, control of his entire stream of tribute money. For the very first time, Sparta had the cash to build ships, pay for good sailors, and keep a real fleet in the water that could finally go head-to-head with Athens. But, money alone isn't enough to win a war. You need leadership. You need a strategy. And this is where Sparta started to get serious. They began to professionalize their naval command. And by doing that, they basically set the stage for a true genius to emerge. So they created this formal position, the Nauarchos. And this wasn't just some general they assigned for a single battle. This was a real official job, the supreme commander of the Navy appointed every year, who held the power of a king while he was out on campaign. It was a huge signal that they were in this for the long haul. But it came with a very, very Spartan catch. See, this was classic Sparta, right? They were terrified that any one person could get too powerful and maybe turn into a tyrant. So the law was clear. You could only be the Nauarchos once. No repeats. But this super rigid rule created a massive problem. What do you do when your allies are basically begging for the return of your one truly great commander who's already done his one-year tour? Well, their solution was just a brilliant little bit of political maneuvering, a clever workaround. They followed the letter of the law, sure, fine. They appointed a new guy as the official Nauarchos. But then They made Lysander his second in command while quietly giving him all the actual power. It's such a clear sign that by the end of the war, winning was finally more important than even their most sacred traditions. So who is this guy, Lysander, that they're bending all the rules for? Well, he was the whole package. He was a brilliant tactician, while the guys before him were clumsy at best. He was a master of discipline in a navy that, let's be honest, had been pretty chaotic. And maybe most importantly, he was a skilled diplomat. He's the one who got that Persian money flowing and kept all of Sparta's allies in line. He wasn't like those earlier commanders making rookie mistakes. Lysander was the right man in the right place at the right time with the right resources. And all of this, it all leads to the final act, the Battle of Agaspotami in 405 BC. This is the moment. This is where all the pieces, the Persian money, the professional command structure, and Lysander's personal genius, all snap together to create one of the most decisive, crushing naval victories in all of history. Lysander's plan here was just a masterclass in patience and smarts. First, he sails his fleet up to the Hellespont, which basically cuts off Athens from its food supply, a huge move. Then, for 4 straight days, he just waits. He lets the Athenians sail out, taunt him, try to get him to fight, and he does nothing. He just refuses. But all the while, his scout ships are watching, learning the Athenian routine. And they notice that every single afternoon, the Athenian crews get off their ships and scatter along the beach to look for food. So on the 5th day, he springs the trap. The signal came, a quick flash from a polished shield, and that was it. Lysander's fleet stormed across the channel. They caught the entire Athenian fleet pulled up on the beach, totally empty. It wasn't even a battle, it was a slaughter. And just like that, with its navy completely wiped out, Athens couldn't feed its people anymore. They had no choice but to surrender. After 27 long, brutal years, the war was finally over. So Sparta did it. They actually achieved the impossible. The greatest land power in the world had become the master of the seas. But how they won? Well, that victory left behind a really complex and, you could say, troubling legacy. I mean, here's the huge irony in all of this. Sparta's whole identity was built on being the great defender of Greek independence, the ones who stood up to foreign powers, especially Persia. And yet, their greatest victory was paid for, lock, stock, and barrel, by the Persian Empire. And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. Was this really a Spartan victory, or was it a Persian one? Think about it. Without all that Persian gold, would Lysander's genius have even mattered? It kind of forces you to rethink what a Spartan victory even means. And it's a good reminder that even for the most famously self-reliant warriors in history, sometimes winning comes at a very, very high price.